Hello, welcome back to another episode of Give Me Some Truth. So today in the slightly refurbished booth, we have Alicia and myself, Mitch, and we're going to do somewhat of a quick hitter. We got a little time to get into it, but somewhat of a quick hitter podcast compared to our usual length. And we're going to talk about Roth conversions. So we're going to define what that is, what it means, why it could be a part of someone's financial plan, but then what are things to avoid? Because sometimes with all this shiny, hey, this sounds awesome, there could be some things to look out for. So with that, I'll use a line from one of our coworkers, Keith. We don't have a whole lot of time to fart around, so no farting around. We're going to jump into it. So, Alicia, do you want to talk a little bit about why Roth can be an awesome thing?
Yeah, so Roth IRAs are great because they can give you tax-free income in retirement. It grows tax-deferred just like a Roth or just like a traditional IRA does. But with an IRA, your tax when you pull that out in retirement. With a Roth IRA, grows tax-deferred, and then that income is then tax-free in retirement. So that's great. It also doesn't have any required minimum distributions. So if you have an IRA, you're required at some point, right now that's age 73, eventually it'll be 75, you're required to take distributions from that account every year. With a Roth IRA, there are no required minimum distributions. So it can also be a good estate planning tool. If you would like to leave something for your kids or for other heirs to inherit, a Roth IRA can be a really good vehicle for that.
And for some people, they hear Roth and tax-free, right? Which, assuming you follow the rules, right, it can absolutely be tax-free growth. And that sounds awesome. Like, how do I get that, right? And obviously, it has to be taxed at some point before you get this Roth status. But we find that some people may have never given any attention to Roth until they realize, oh, I'm getting close to RMD age. My distributions are going to be big. And whoops, I might be in a higher tax bracket, actually, than maybe even when they were working. So what are some of the opportune times to potentially consider implementing a Roth conversion strategy?
Ideally before your RMD age. We've had clients bring it up, they don't have a ton of time or a ton of wiggle room in order to do that. They're going to be starting RMDs, maybe next year. So the best time to do this is right when you retire. Typically when you retire, your income drops because you're not working anymore, and that can be a prime time to start considering some partial Roth conversions. Your taxable income is lower. You may be in a lower tax bracket than you ever were before while working or while RMD age. So that can be a really great time to do it.
And you might not have Social Security income yet. So depending on when you retire and all those factors, you might not have that turned on quite yet.
Exactly. So there's kind of that window between retirement and then whatever age you claim Social Security can be the ideal time to do some partial Roth conversions.
Do you mind if I interject there?
Yeah.
Because also, when we say Roth conversion, that's literally meaning taking it from tax-deferred IRA bucket and converting it to Roth, and that is the moment then that it's subject to taxation. And then another key point that you made is the word partial. Because you and I, we talk about this probably daily, so we can just cruise right through that, right? But there's been times where we've had conversations with clients, prospective clients, et cetera, where they think it could be an all or nothing thing. And like most times it is not an all or nothing thing.
Absolutely not.
Because then you could crank up your tax bill to, a very high amount, we'll say. But a lot of times it is a partial Roth conversion, meaning, hey, I got this big IRA bucket of all tax deferred money, and whether it's $20,000, $50,000, $100,000 more, it's a little bit of that account balance. And then the key is really coming up with a game plan, usually over multi-years, to try to get a significant enough amount over to that Roth bucket. So I wanted to interject.
No, that's a good point. You're right. We talk about this all the time, so we're used to it. And it may not just be partial in terms of you're not converting your whole IRA that year, but you may never convert the whole thing. That may not be the goal, to convert the entire IRA to Roth.
And that's okay.
Because you could end up on the other side of it, where if you convert all of your tax-deferred accounts to Roth accounts, now in retirement, the only bucket you're pulling from is tax-free, and maybe your only income is Social Security, and now you're in a lower tax bracket than you were when you were doing Roth conversions. So a Roth conversion is really only advantageous if you are kind of taking a longer view of where am I at now? What tax bracket am I in now? What tax bracket will I be 10 years from now in retirement? What tax bracket will I be in 20 years from now in retirement? And trying to make some educated guesses about how that tax rate is going to change over time. Really, the ideal thing that we like to see is having clients have options. So they have a bucket of tax-deferred, a bucket of Roth, maybe they have a bucket of assets that are in a taxable account. Maybe they have Social Security. If they're lucky, maybe they have some pensions. And they really have diversity of income, which is going to give them options.
Tax diversification, as we say.
Yes.
So and that's something that's very important, because what you're doing essentially is trying to play a tax arbitrage game. So when can I tax? Because it's going to be taxed at some point. I mean, in theory, I guess you could have a bunch of tax deferred money and die, and you don't really realize that tax bill. But you're playing tax arbitrage, because most people would prefer to say, well, I'd rather be taxed at 12% than something higher than that.
Yep.
So it is an educated guess, absolutely. But there's strategy around it. And sometimes our job, I think, is just pointing out some of the things that may not be thought of from someone that retires. So whether it is something that's happening with the law, or, even something like what I mentioned earlier, the Social Security, right? Some people aren't thinking like, oh yeah, that will be subject to taxation, or a portion of it will be at least. So part of our job then is to map that out and say, okay, this, whether it's 2, 3, 4, 5 year span, that might be the prime time to actually do it.
And then there's the question of, how do you pay the taxes? So if you're converting to Roth, you're going to have a tax bill. How do you pay that tax bill?
Yeah. And one way is, the preferred way, in our opinion, is if you have a pile of cash on the sidelines, something that you can pay out of pocket to pay that tax liability. Another option, I'll pass it back to you, the less preferred option, we'll say it's possible, but we don't recommend it.
Yeah, is you can pay the taxes out of, so if you're converting IRA funds to Roth, you can pay the taxes out of the IRA. But the problem is now you're pulling out tax-deferred assets. Those are going away, and your now Roth bucket is smaller than your IRA bucket. The idea is to keep your Roth IRA bucket the same size as your IRA bucket. But if you make that bucket smaller by pulling money out additionally to pay those taxes, you're losing some of those benefits of that tax-deferred growth in the account. So it may not make sense if you don't have the ability to pay cash out of pocket for those taxes. It may not make sense to do the conversion.
It could completely kind of eliminate the purpose of it, really. I mean, you could almost just wash out the benefit.
Yep, exactly.
Yeah.
What about the 5-year rule? How does that factor in?
That's true. So the 5-year rule, some people may be aware of this, but generally if you put money into a Roth, then you have to wait 5 years before you can access it to truly get the tax-free growth, dividends, interest growth, et cetera, from it. Same thing applies here. So in theory, someone could, if they wanted to get ahead of it, let's say they have no Roth money, you could fund a Roth IRA, with $1 early in retirement or something. And as you're coming up with your Roth IRA game plan here, because if the conversion itself happens the following year, lots of different scenarios there that plays out, but you start that clock, that 5-year starts ticking. And then all you got to do is get through that 5 years. And then beyond that is when you can access the tax-free money. Now, typically when we're implementing a strategy like this, there's going to be other buckets from an income strategy perspective anyway. So more often than not, you shouldn't need to access that in 5 years. But it is surely consideration when it comes to planning around it.
Yeah, definitely. And the other thing that I think people think about or don't think about when considering Roth conversions is it's not just about tax bracket. You also have to consider other things that go into your taxes besides the bracket. It could be certain credits that you're eligible for based on your income. And now if you're realizing more income, you may no longer be eligible for some tax credits, and now you're paying more in taxes. The other thing is the Medicare charges. The Medicare premiums that you pay are based similarly on your, not exactly on your tax brackets, but they are based on your income. And it's actually 2 years prior. So you could think, hey, I'm age 63, I'm not paying Medicare yet. But your Medicare premiums when you're 65 are based on your tax return 2 years prior. So that's something that maybe people, one, they don't even know that that's a thing. And two, they certainly don't know that it's actually from 2 years ago.
Yeah.
And that's something that you have to consider even before you're eligible for Medicare.
Oh, yeah. I mean, I've heard whether it's a conversation at the holiday party or whatever it is, oh, my Medicare premiums went up significantly. They doubled, or who knows? And then you have to kind of reverse engineer it, backtrack. Well, like, did something happen? Did you realize some gains? What could have driven up? Because it's a 2-year look back, and sometimes people do things not even remotely thinking ahead of, oh, this is going to affect me on a monthly basis.
And that's a cliff. So, with the marginal tax rates, if your income goes over into the next bracket, it's only the amount of income that goes over that amount that
it's
is
just
taxed
that next
at the higher
dollar,
amount.
that next $2, or next $3.
Exactly. But if you go over the line to the next kind of step up in the Medicare premiums, that's what you're paying.
Yep.
So that can be a pretty significant amount. You go over by $1, and now you're paying more every month for Medicare.
Yeah, absolutely. And tax planning is something very important in retirement once you're on a fixed income, because IRMA is another way, by the way, I don't know if we define that, but IRMA premiums is what we're referring to when we're talking about this increase in your monthly Medicare cost. So are there any other considerations that people should be thinking about, or whether it's kind of the timeline within a year, I'll say, of when should we be thinking about this? When should we effectively act on the plan?
Yeah.
Is it beginning of the year, end of the year, middle of the year? What's the game plan?
Well, it's something that you want to start thinking of after you file your taxes. So after April 15th, you filed your taxes, you have your tax return from the previous year. That's sort of the starting point. Then the other piece of information that you want to have is, what is your income going to be for that year? So that you sort of know, well, how much more income can I realize this year before I start to run afoul of the next tax bracket, losing credits, Medicare charges, etc. So it's something that you want to start earlier in the year, but you're not finalizing the plan, and you're not landing on that specific dollar amount until closer to the end of the year. But you don't want to wait until the end of December when everyone else is scrambling at the last minute to try to do these things, because if you don't have everything in place by then, you may not actually get it done in time before the end of the year, and you have to have it completed by December 31st.
Unlike if you were making a Roth IRA contribution, right? You can do that up to the tax filing deadline for the previous year. This is something that must happen in the tax year. Yep. And places, whether it's Schwab or Fidelity or wherever you custody your assets, turns out they're kind of busy towards the end of the year. And process, you have to give a little buffer from a processing time perspective. So that's incredibly important.
It can take a few weeks at the end of the year.
Yep.
So the last thing I want to do before we have to wrap up here is kind of a little thing. We've been talking about this from the perspective of people who are retiring, people who are getting closer to RMD age. But you and I both did a Roth conversion when we were younger.
There we go. Yeah.
We had a small balance in an IRA, and we knew that we were young and our income was likely going to be growing, and we wanted to get that into a Roth IRA early on. So both of us in our 20s bit the tax bullet, paid for a small conversion from a traditional IRA to a Roth, and that allowed us to do backdoor Roth contributions as our income grew, and both of us agree that was a really great decision for us. So this isn't just...
I already 100% believe it was the right call.
Yeah, absolutely. In hindsight, for sure, and I knew at the time it was as well. So this isn't something that's just for retirees or people who are in their 60s. This is something that if you're young and your income is going to be growing from where you're at now, or for a temporary reason, you took some time off, you took half a year off, you're in between jobs, for whatever reason, if your income is lower, this might make sense.
Opportunity.
So, yep.
When things change financially, there could be opportunity. So thank you for tuning in to another quick hitter podcast. We could have gone more and more and more, but thank you for tuning in to Give Me Some Truth. We will see you again next time.
Walker Conant Financial Advisors is a registered investment advisor with the SEC. Registration with the SEC does not imply a certain level of skill or training. The opinions expressed by the participants of this podcast are their own and do not reflect the opinions of Walker Conant Financial Advisors. All statements and opinions expressed are based upon information considered reliable, although it should not be relied upon as such. Any statements or opinions are subject to change without notice. Information presented is for educational purposes only and does not intend to make an offer or solicitation for the sale or purchase of any specific securities, investments, or investment strategies. Investments involve risk and, unless otherwise stated, are not guaranteed. Information expressed does not take into account your specific situation or objectives and is not intended as recommendations appropriate for any individual. Listeners are encouraged to seek advice from a qualified tax, legal, or investment advisor to determine whether any information